elite police baboons, the mysterious death of the eternally unlucky King Tut, and even ancient Egyptian erotica. We'll be revealing 50 insane facts about ancient Egypt in today's episode of the Infographics Show. Fact 50. Historians love to fight over whether King Tut was killed by a hippo. The only thing we know for sure about the sickly King Tutankhamun's death was that he had a devastating leg injury, which led to him later dying from infection. But how did he get that busted leg? That's the kind of mystery that turns a room full of historians into a WWE SmackDown. One strange theory is that King Tut fell afoul of a very hungry hippo while hunting. Paintings in his tomb showed him throwing a harpoon, which were often used in big game hunting back in ancient Egypt. Egyptologists are free to argue about this in the comments. Fact 49. Shepherd of the Anus was a real ancient Egyptian job title. That was the literal translation for what Egyptians called proctologists. Herodotus documented Egyptian doctors specializing in certain medical fields as early as the year 450 BC while visiting the nation. He observed eye doctors, stomach doctors, and even doctors of the tooth, which we'd know better as dentists. It doesn't seem so special now, but medical practitioners specializing was just one more thing that made the ancient Egyptians so shockingly advanced for their era. Though some ancient Egyptian medicine was a little more insane. We'll get to that later. Fact 48. Cleopatra wasn't even an Egyptian. Despite being one of the most famous figures of ancient Egypt today, thanks to a certain obscure British playwright named Bill Shakespeare, although Cleopatra VII was born in Alexandria, she was Greek Macedonian and the descendant of one of Alexander the Great's best buddies, Ptolemy I. From 323 to 30 BC, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt and installed their leaders there. While Cleopatra wasn't culturally Egyptian, she did make history as one of the first rulers in the dynasty to actually speak Egyptian. Way to go, Cleo! Speaking of women in Egypt, fact 47. Ancient Egypt was a great country for women's rights. Unlike the decidedly anti-women culture of the ancient Greeks, who were sometimes so misogynistic they just decided to be gay instead, ancient Egyptian women were able to serve on juries, enter legal contracts, make wills, and buy and sell property. And while not all women worked outside of the home, those that did had equal pay to men. Take that, Greece! But wait, there's more. Ancient Egyptian couples were able to form prenuptial agreements, and women were allowed to divorce and remarry with compensation if they brought their own money into the marriage. And that's not even the only way that they were insanely ahead of their time. Fact 46. Ancient Egyptian laborers were the first ones to ever go on strike. Millennia before Jimmy Hoffa rose and then mysteriously disappeared, Egyptian laborers knew how to apply the pressure to get the pay they felt they deserved. During the 12th century BC, under Pharaoh Ramses III, the laborers building the royal necropolis at Deir el-Medina put down their tools and occupied the nearby mortuaries until the pharaoh agreed to give them the payment in grain that they demanded. This is particularly impressive when you remember that the pharaohs were literal gods to their people. Fact 45. Ancient Egyptians loved board games. Just like every millennial hipster insisting on Settlers of Catan at parties, pharaohs and even everyday Egyptians were all about their board games. They had collections stacked with classics like Mehen, Dogs and Jackals, and the OG classic, Senet. There were elite board gamers all the way back in 3500 BC, and there are even paintings of Queen Nefertari playing Senet. Sadly, historians lost the exact rules of the game, so adding it to our collections is about as likely as finding a mint-condition Atari in a pyramid. Speaking of the pharaohs, though, fact 44. A lot of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs were fat. It's hard to imagine, especially when you picture the preserved tomb paintings of the civilization's mighty rulers. They were always pretty svelte. But given pharaohs lived large on Egyptian luxuries like beer, wine, bread, and honey, real pharaohs were a bit less Rami Malek and a bit more Homer Simpson. Many of the pharaohs, including Queen Hatshepsut, literally had diabetes. Fact 43. Slaves did not build the pyramids. When you picture the Great Pyramids being built, you probably imagine thousands of imprisoned workers being whipped by brutal Egyptian taskmasters. But that was actually a myth started by the writer Herodotus, the ancient Greek king of spilled tea. Most historians agree that the pyramids were actually made by paid construction workers, and they were so proud of their work that a lot of them even signed their nicknames of their crews on the site with graffiti, including Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. So yeah, construction workers haven't changed much in 4,500 years. Fact 42. Ancient Egyptians made one of the first ever peace treaties. One of the biggest enemies of the ancient Egyptians were the Hittite Empire, who occupied what's now modern-day Syria. The two civilizations duked it out for over 200 years, including in 1274 BC's Battle of Kadesh, with no decisive victory between them. So while their mutual enemies amassed greater strength, the two ancient superpowers did something unprecedented. They grabbed some parchment and came to the negotiation table. Back in 1259 BC, Pharaoh Ramses II and Hittite King Hattusili III signed a peace treaty, agreeing to back each other up if any wannabe conquerors came a-knockin'. This treaty is such a big deal it's actually posted above the entrance to the United Nations Security Council chamber. Fact 41. Ancient Egyptians loved makeup. And this was true regardless of gender. Why? Because they just wanted to look fabulous? Well, yeah, but it's also because they believed wearing makeup would give them protection from the gods Horus and Ra, like some ancient celestial RuPaul's Drag Race. Ancient Egyptian makeup, called kohl, was made from ground ores like malachite and galena and applied to their face with a variety of ivory, bone, and wooden utensils. And while we can't say if they really did get benefits from Horus and Ra, it's believed that a lot of the lead-based makeups helped reduce the rates of eye infections. Don't get too used to happy endings, we got some insane stuff coming. Fact 40. Egyptians loved domesticating animals. Most people know about the ancient Egyptian culture's reverence for cats, believed to give them favor with cat-like goddess Bastet. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. They also loved baboons, hawks, lions, ibises, and dogs, and were often used by Egyptian policemen, a kind of precursor to modern canine units. Believe it or not, baboons were used to help catch criminals too, which we think would be an amazing premise for a buddy cop show. The ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with their pets that they had them mummified and buried alongside them. Basically the ultimate ride-or-die commitment to make sure that Fluffy joined them in the afterlife. Speaking of ancient Egyptians and animals, fact 39. Egyptians never actually rode camels. While camels may seem like the quintessential beast of burden for deserts of the ancient and modern worlds, they didn't come to use in Egypt until after the age of pharaohs. So, what did they use instead? The humble donkey. Based on this, we think the pharaohs probably would have loved Shrek. Fact 38. Not that many ancient Egyptians were actually mummified. We know, it's shocking, especially considering that mummies are one of the most enduring symbols of the entire civilization. However, it was an incredibly involved process, and so it was most often reserved for the most rich and powerful people in society, pharaohs and their inner circles. Most of the Egyptian peasants were buried in large collective death pits, which isn't quite as romantic an image as the classic mummy. But that wasn't the only weird thing that the ancient Egyptians did with their dead. Fact 37. The ancient Egyptians liked to dine with their dead. Thinking about dead relatives doesn't usually spark an appetite, unless you're a cannibal. But the ancient Egyptians loved a meal with their dearly departed. Families would bring snacks to the tomb chapels and offer up treats to the Ka, or spirit of their loved ones. Nothing says family bonding like a feast with the undead. After the food was symbolically consumed by the deceased loved one, the living relatives would then eat the food. This practice was particularly common during the Feast of the Valley, an annual religious festival honoring the dead and celebrating life. Fact 36. It was actually pretty rare to write in hieroglyphics. This is another enduring symbol of ancient Egyptian civilization, but these sacred scripts were reserved for the important stuff, decking out temples, tombs, and detailing the epic tales of royals and gods. Only the VIPs of texts got the hieroglyph treatment. For day-to-day writing, scribes used a simplified writing system called hieratic, which lacked the more detailed and time-consuming pictographic elements. But even that was still pretty rare. Only around 10% of the ancient Egyptian populace was even literate. Fact 35. In ancient Egypt, a woman could be a king. Their king wasn't an inherently masculine term, and the closest word in the ancient Egyptian language to queen means king's wife. Sobeknefru, Hatshepsut, and Tausret were all technically female kings rather than queens. Speaking of important women in ancient Egypt, it's time to revisit our old gal, Cleo. Fact 34. Cleopatra might not have actually been beautiful. Sure, beauty may be kind of a relative concept, but the image of Cleopatra as one of the greatest historical hotties is possibly another modern invention. While Hollywood gave us a bombshell in a black wig and eye cap makeup, coins featuring Cleo's face that were minted at the time show she might have had more, let's say, striking features. But whether this was a true reflection of Cleopatra's face or of the skills of ancient Egyptian coin makers is just another thing lost to history, much like our next sexy Cleopatra fact. Fact 33. Some historians think Cleopatra invented the first vibrator. While it may be apocryphal, like a lot of history's sauciest facts, it's often been said that the Queen Cleo may have invented the world's first vibrator. This was a hollowed-out gourd filled with angry bees. High risk, high reward, right ladies? Now let's get back to the other most famous ancient Egyptian ruler. Fact 32. King Tut was the product of incest. We mentioned earlier in the Hippo fact that Tutankhamun was a notoriously sickly king, and this is likely because his parents were siblings. Yuck. Royals keeping it in the family was all too common for preserving power and wealth, but like the infamous Habsburgs, this strategy often created rulers who belonged in the ICU, not the throne. Tut was frail, had scoliosis, a cleft palate, one flat foot and the other clubbed, and some mild necrosis in his extremities that indicated either Freiberg disease or Kohler disease. Poor kid. Fact 31. Ancient Egyptians invented a weirdly effective pregnancy test. These days, a trip to the pharmacy is all you need to get yourself an easy pregnancy test. You can even buy digital ones. But back on the Nile, you needed to do it the old-fashioned way. They would pee on a pile of wheat and barley seeds, and depending on whether they grow, they'll be able to determine whether they were looking at a pregnancy. It seems like typical primitive folk medicine. But an expert in the early 1960s revealed that the test was actually accurate 70% of the time. It's a pretty impressive track record for a method invented a few millennia ago. And that's not the only sexual health measures the ancient Egyptians took. Fact 30. Ancient Egyptians invented their own weird methods of contraception. Women of the time would try to avoid pregnancy with crocodile dung or dough placed in their vagina. Gross. In addition to seed wool, acacia, dates, and honey, some of which had spermicidal properties, but clearly this wasn't all effective and they needed to use their own forms of Plan B when the first line of defense failed. An herb called silphium was taken to terminate pregnancies, which wasn't considered all that taboo in ancient Egyptian culture. Speaking of ancient Egyptians getting busy, fact 29. Ancient Egyptians invented their own primitive version of Playboy. Back in 1500 BC, some ancient Egyptian mad lad created what would later become known as the Turin Erotic Papyrus. It features two sections. One is the erotic section, which features 12 sexual vignettes between men and women. The other is the comedy section, which features animals doing tasks that humans would normally do. This strange mixture of erotica and satire was ahead of its time, with some historians referring to it as the world's first men's mag. Yet another amazing Egyptian innovation. Now let's do another gross one. Fact 28. Ancient Egypt had the world's grossest toothpaste. These folks were using their own form of toothpaste as early as 5000 BC. But believe us when we say you would not want this toothpaste going anywhere near your mouth. The most popular mixture was believed to be myrrh, oxen hooves, water, pumice, and eggshells, which would be rubbed with the finger onto the teeth and gums. We'll stick to Colgate, thanks. Fact 27. The River Nile allowed ancient Egyptian society to flourish. Whether it's real estate or starting an iconic historical kingdom, one rule remains constant: location, location, location. And the River Nile, the longest river in the world, was the wellspring of life for an entire culture. Most Egyptians lived along the Nile, taking advantage of its water for both drinking and irrigation, and planting their staple crops in its rich soil. It even provided water for the Egyptians to flush their toilets. Fact 26. Sometimes the ancient Egyptians' love of animals was used against them. You're probably wondering, what does that mean? Well, you have to ask Polyaenus, a Macedonian historian who chronicled the first successful Persian conquest of Egypt led by Persian king Cambyses II. According to Polyaenus, quote, Cambyses ranged before his front line cats and whatever other animals the Egyptians hold sacred. The Egyptians immediately stopped their operations out of fear of hurting the animals, which they hold in great veneration. Cambyses captured Pelusium and thereby opened up for himself the route into Egypt. Cambyses might have pulled a total jerk move, but hey, it got the job done. Which of these facts has shocked you so far? Let us know in the comments before we dive deeper. Fact 25. The ancient Egyptians saw lettuce as a sacred sex symbol. Personally, when we think of lettuce, we don't think sexy, but we're not ancient Egyptians. They associated lettuce with the fertility god Min and saw it as an aphrodisiac because of its apparent similarity to a phallus, which does make us wonder what kind of lettuce the ancient Egyptians were eating. Fact 24. One pharaoh had his own personal duo of gay chief manicurists. Khnumhotep and Khnum were overseers of an elite group in ancient Egypt who were permitted to physically touch the literal god among men, that was the pharaoh. Because otherwise, how would they have given King Userre such wonderful nails? The duo were found in a tomb together next to a large mural depicting them embracing, intimately touching their faces against each other. They also had an inscription above the door of their tomb reading "Joined in life and joined in death." While both men were married, being buried in the same tomb was unique, and this has led to fierce speculation among historians. It seems that Khnumhotep and Khnum's close relationship might have been a little more than brotherly. Fact 23. Ancient Egyptians used crocodile dung to perform exorcisms. It's a well-known fact that ancient Egyptians loved magic almost as much as TikTok astrology influencers. A decent portion of this magic was geared toward warding off or driving out evil spirits, which were believed to have been behind a large number of illnesses and inconveniences of the time. Egyptian magicians believed that evil spirits were attracted to disgusting things. They would try to use lures made of dung to draw these demonic presences out of the bodies of possessed people. Conversely, sweet things like honey were believed to ward off demons, and that is why Winnie the Pooh has never been recorded as being possessed by Satan. Can you prove us wrong there? Fact 22. Ancient Egypt had a forgotten femboy pharaoh. Until recently, King Akhenaten, better known as Nefertiti's lesser half, was practically erased from history. He dared to mess with tradition by pushing a monotheistic worship of Aten, which made him a major headache for the religious establishment. But that's not the most interesting thing about King Akhenaten. Due to a rare genetic condition, likely caused by all that incest in Egyptian royal bloodlines, he had a misshapen head and a feminine body, including wide hips and breasts. However, he also had a penis and testicles, and he was highly virile, fathering 6 daughters over the course of his reign. He's now looked back on as a rare but interesting example of a prominent intersex historical figure. Fact 21. Ever want to learn how to curse your enemies? Ancient Egyptian style? Though voodoo dolls didn't come from voodoo, curse dolls were an ancient Egyptian go-to. If you wanted to hex like an Egyptian, you'd craft dolls from clay and papyrus in your target's likeness and then let the bad vibes do the rest. Crush it, stab it, just take out all your aggression on it, then fill a bucket with your urine and dunk the remains of the doll into it, letting it dissolve. Yeah, it is weird and gross, but putting a hex on someone probably shouldn't be easy, just for ethical reasons. Fact 20. Cleopatra and Mark Antony had a secret drinking club. As we mentioned earlier, Egyptian pharaohs loved to drink, hence all the beer guts. But none of them were quite as big of booze hounds as our old gal Cleo. She loved to knock 'em back so much that she created an elite club called the Inimitable Livers for people who liked to party hardy, Andrew WK style. Some historians have theorized that this was Cleopatra paying tribute to the Greek god of debauchery, Dionysus. But it's just as likely that she and Mark just loved drinking. Fact 19. The ancient Egyptians invented sunscreen back in 3100 to 3000 BC. Today, sunscreen is all about UV protection, but for the ancient Egyptians, it was more of a beauty hack. They loved light skin, so after bathing, they'd slather on rice to block UV rays and jasmine and lupine to keep that prized light skin glow. Whether this resulted in fewer rates of sunburn and skin cancer back in ancient Egypt, we will sadly never know. Fact 18. King Tut was buried with an incredibly badass dagger, specifically an iron-bladed ceremonial double-sided dagger. Why was this special? King Tut lived and died during the Bronze Age when iron was incredibly rare, and researchers have recently concluded that the dagger's blade was likely made out of a meteorite. And if you don't think that's cool, then we just don't have anything else to say to each other. However, a dagger wasn't the only long, hard thing that King Tut was buried with. Fact 17. King Tut was buried with a raging boner. When Tut was first excavated, he was found with his penis sticking out at a 90-degree angle, his skin covered in black oil, and his heart removed. Why did they let the god king of Egypt have such a humiliating final rest? Because all of these modifications made him appear more like the god Osiris, which they hoped would help stop a religious revolution that Tut's own father had started. Sadly for this would-be Osiris, his dong was accidentally broken off not long after the explorers started grave robbing. Man, King Tut just cannot catch a break, can he? Fact 16. Philadelphia has its roots in Egyptian incest. Yeah, you weren't expecting that one, were you? Incest among ancient Egyptian royalty has sadly been a running theme in this video, with queens often marrying their brothers to keep their bloodline, quote, pure. This was so common that the ancient Greeks developed a nickname for them, Philadelphoi. This later inspired the ancient city of Philadelphia and then the modern American city. Philadelphia, of course, meaning the city of brotherly love. Yikes! Fact 15. The iconic ancient Egyptian pharaoh beards were fake. And no, we don't mean that they were a historical myth made up later. Pharaohs are often shown with long, braided beards, but they were usually clean-shaven. Those beards were actually fake, worn to imitate the god Osiris. It was such a power move that even Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh, rocked the fake beard like a boss. Fact 14. The Great Pyramids of Egypt aren't actually the world's biggest pyramids. That honor goes to the Great Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico, which covers a significantly larger surface than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Egypt does have the height advantage, though. The Great Pyramid is 71 meters higher than its Mexican counterpart. Fact 13. The Egyptians never actually enslaved the Israelites. While this myth was popularized by the Book of Exodus, like many mythological stories, it isn't supported by any meaningful historical evidence. The consensus among scholars is that it's just an origin myth rather than an account of history. However, this doesn't mean that there weren't slaves in ancient Egypt. So the pharaohs can't be entirely let off the hook. Sometimes captured enemies in wars were rendered into slaves. Poor families would sometimes sell their children into slavery for extra money. And in emergencies, the pharaoh did have the right to conscript peasants into mandatory labor forces. Fact 12. Ancient Egyptian interrogation was brutal. While rights were advanced in some areas, they weren't really in others, such as treatment of suspected criminals or even witnesses. Egyptian law enforcement had a one-size-fits-all approach to interrogation. Beat the hell out of them with a rod until they told you everything you need to know. Fact 11. Ancient Egyptian artists working in the royal tombs developed a weird illness. Archaeological digs in the village of Deir el-Medina, home to many artisans who decorated the royal necropolis, revealed a strange finding. Many of the craftsmen had osteoporosis in their ankles and knees, but not in their hands and wrists, as you would expect from people doing manual labor all day. What was happening here? The strain on their bodies turned out to be from carrying their tools up the hill from the village to the necropolis every day, rather than any of the actual work. Speaking of medical maladies, fact 10. Ancient Egyptians had a major dental problem. Despite the organic toothpaste we mentioned earlier, or maybe because of it, a study of 4,800 ancient Egyptian teeth showed that 90% were ground down so badly the centers were exposed. This dental disaster led to cysts, abscesses, and even jaw osteoarthritis. This was because the Egyptians had an almost impossible task in keeping sand out of their food. Over time, the grit of the sand itself caused irreparable damage to the teeth of everyone eating it. Ouch! Fact 9. The ancient Egyptians were extremely progressive when it comes to disability. Archaeological finds from Deir el-Medina revealed that people born with disabilities like missing limbs or dwarfism lived long, fulfilling lives in roles adapted to their needs. Unlike later societies that stigmatized disabilities, ancient Egypt seemed refreshingly inclusive, centuries before eugenics cast a dark shadow. Jobs available to people with disabilities that prevented manual labor included artisans, entertainers, and overseers. Fact 8. Almost everyone was bald in ancient Egypt. It turns out it wasn't just the beards that were fake. You've probably seen the classic tomb paintings depicting countless workers with shaved heads and bald pharaohs with elaborate headdresses. This wasn't just a chic fashion movement, it was a decision of necessity. Lice was such a huge problem in ancient Egypt that going bald was more of a practical decision than just trying to treat all the cases. Even most of the women just wore wigs out of practicality. Fact 7. Ancient Egyptians used laxatives with concerning frequency. In order to stay slim and healthy, it was common for Egyptians to use a laxative made of castor oil 3 days out of each month. And because this was in the days before plumbing, it was sadly an extremely messy affair. For reasons that are hard to understand, they even used laxatives to treat diarrhea, which isn't so much treating it as it's just speed running it. But we digress. Even that isn't as vile as our next fact. Fact 6. Ancient Egyptians thought that men menstruated too. Schistosomiasis was one of the many extremely common illnesses that circulated around the nation, which caused nausea as well as blood in the urine and stool. This was so common that they didn't even know it was a disease. They just assumed that men had periods too from all of the blood in their urine and feces. Fact 5. The kingdom of ancient Egypt was so enduring that Cleopatra was born closer to the modern day than to the building of the pyramids. Fact 4. The ancient Egyptians thought that the heart did all the thinking and the brain was useless. This is why when bodies were being mummified, the heart was one of the most important organs kept within the body for use in the afterlife, while the other organs would be placed into sacred canopic jars. The brain, on the other hand, was just skull filler. It got mashed up with a hook, yanked out through the nose, and then tossed aside like yesterday's trash. Fact 3. A lot of ancient Egyptian currency was based on bread, grain, and beer. Bread and beer weren't just staples, they were the backbone of Egypt's economy and religion. When Nile crops thrived, bread and beer flowed. Paydays were sweet and offerings to gods and ancestors piled up. It's kind of a miracle that anything got done in an economy where the beer flowed so freely. Fact 2. We mentioned canopic jars earlier. How did these vital little pieces of the mummification process actually work? There were 4 different jars, each one of them representing a different direction, protected by a different goddess and modeled after one of Horus's 4 sons, Hapi, Duamutef, Imseti, and Quibisenewef, each of which was designated a different vital organ to protect. Hapi is the baboon-headed god protected by the goddess Nephthys and representing the north. The lungs would be placed into this jar. Duamutef is the jackal-headed god protected by the goddess Neith and representing the east. The stomach would be placed into this jar. Imseti is the human-headed god protected by the goddess Isis and representing the south. The liver would be placed into this jar. And Quibisenewef is the falcon-headed god protected by the goddess Serket and representing the west. The intestines would be placed into this jar. Fact 1. Egyptian women were given a few days to decay before they were embalmed. Why? Because authorities didn't trust the embalmers with a fresh female corpse. Yikes! Which fact was the craziest? Got one we missed? Spill the ancient tea in the comments. Now check out Real Reason Ancient Egyptians Went Extinct, or watch this instead.